Hey, peace to all the listeners. I just wanted to post this video because, a lot of brothers, and I see this a lot on the internet. You have a lot of these cats that like to talk about different athletes, different so-called black athletes, and they call them coons and sellouts and Uncle Toms, yada yada yada, just because they don't depict the image of the black male athlete that they think should be depicted, or they don't depict the image of the black male athlete that allegedly existed back in the 50s and 60s. They always tell you about Kareem and Jim Brown and all these different guys who, were so pro-black and so strong and yada yada yada. And I'm not saying that those guys didn't do anything, but their reputation is highly inflated. All right, a lot of those guys were controlled, and the civil rights movement of the 40s and 50s and 60s was controlled. All right, predominantly by white Jews, by the white Jewish conglomerate. All right, they were the ones who were normally puppeting things behind the scenes. All right. So now, one of the more famous gatherings amongst black athletes was the meeting that they had with Ali and a lot of other black athletes, organized allegedly by Jim Brown, allegedly, where they were going to supposedly support Ali in his stance against the Vietnam War, yada yada yada. I already knew by reading and researching a lot of different things many years ago that was not the case. They were having that meeting to try to get an understanding of why Ali was doing what he was doing. But now in the aftermath, it's become this big thing where all these black athletes stood up. The modern day liberal media, race baiting. They've tried to rewrite the narrative and tell you about how all these black athletes stood up for Ali and a bunch of BS. And a lot of them have let the narrative go because they like the positive press. People like Kareem and Jim Brown, they don't correct it. But in reality, that whole meeting was controlled. All right. And this guy, Bob Arum, he's going to tell you right now that the whole thing was controlled and he was the one who was behind the whole thing.
But what a fight that was.
So you did promote a number of Ali fights, and you were
25.
25 of them.
Wow.
And I read that when Ali refused induction and he took the 43 months, he accepted his ban, that you were able to pull a few strings, and you got it to where through the Lyndon Johnson administration, if he had done some appearance work, that he could have continued to fight.
This is one of my dear friends is Jim Brown. And Jim was the guy who introduced me to Ali and got me into the business.
All right, so y'all heard that, right? He said one of his dear friends was Jim Brown. And Jim Brown is the one who hooked him up into the boxing business. All right? So, just understand that. Jim Brown is a guy who, even though he has the pro-black image and he has done some things for the gangs, there's a lot of things about Jim Brown also that they like to sweep under the rug. All right? But anyway.
So now when Ali takes the position that he's not going to go into the service, I had a partner in my law firm who was the treasurer of the Democratic Party. And we worked out a deal with Lyndon Johnson. Ali, you don't have to put a uniform on. Just do some exhibitions at military bases and continue your professional career. So I go to Jim. And this was the time when we were, working hard to get black people into business, particularly athletes. So that the idea I had with Jim Brown, in those days we had closed circuit exhibitors having regions of the country, and it was very lucrative. And football players were making like $10,000 a season. So I said, Jim, get all the athletes together, the black athletes, let them talk to Ali and convince him to take this deal.
So you heard that, right? There's no getting around that. He's the one, Bob Arum is the one who organized that meeting that they love to show over and over and over again, the same picture of them standing there. But and doing how they do, he was trying to use other black athletes to convince Ali to take the deal so that he could continue to make money. He said that at that time they were trying to teach black athletes about business. No, you were not. You were trying to find a better way to monetize the black athletes so that you could make more money. All right. So that's what that meeting was really all about. That was a ruse for Bob Arum to get Ali to keep fighting, because Ali was his cash cow at the time, and he didn't want Ali to step away from boxing in his prime, because it would have cost him a lot of money.
And I will divide up the country and make these guys my regional exhibitors. So
that was the payoff for all those athletes who attended that meeting. Bob Arum was going to hook them up and make them like business partners, subsidiaries for him all across the country. All right. So this was an early form of corporatizing the so-called black athlete. Right. Their job was to try to convince Ali to keep fighting. But Bob Arum is going to tell you how that meeting went right now.
Jim got Willie Davis. There weren't that many black guys in the NFL then, but all of them that were there, the good ones, he brought to that meeting. Bill Russell came. Lou Alcindor was he was a college student. He came, and the idea, Bobby Mitchell, I remember, the idea was to convince Ali to take the deal. Now,
you see what he just said? That was the point of the meeting. The point of the meeting was to convince Ali to take the deal with the government to keep boxing and make appearances so that Bob Arum could keep making money. All right? In return, they were going to get a payoff.
Bill Russell, when he reported accurately that was the purpose of the meeting. And they started talking to Ali, and then Ali got up and talked for 2 hours and convinced them that what he was doing was correct, not going in and so forth, and they all agreed to back him. Now they tell the story that they all met to talk Ali, to tell him that they were supporting him,
yeah.
which is not true. Anyway.
Okay. So he believes so strongly in his anti-Vietnam stance, he didn't even want to appear for the military to continue fighting.
Actually, it was a sweetheart deal. It was the best deal that the government could work out to save face. Everybody wanted to save face. And look at what this guy did. He said no to that deal. It meant that he would be indicted and convicted for draft evasion. So he faced 5 years in prison. His licenses were taken away. So people say, were you ever worried that he never could fight again? Hell no. I was worried that the guy would go to jail.
Right.
Of course he was worried that he was going to go to jail, because Ali was his meal ticket into the boxing business. All right. So that's the point behind the whole thing. And you notice he said that they've gone and they've taken, this narrative, a lot of these other so-called black or so-called African-American athletes that were at the meeting, they've taken this narrative and ran with it because it was good for their image. Because none of them really believed in what Ali was doing, because they were not operating at his wavelength. All right. Ali was he was operating on the wavelength of the Nation of Islam. At the time, they understood the importance of the separatist movement so that so-called blacks could get a greater understanding of who they're supposed to be. All those other black athletes, they were into the so-called integration. They were at a very low level, simple-minded level. That's why Ali was able to speak to them and make them understand where his viewpoint was at that time. All right. And I'm sure it was very easy to do, because most of these black athletes even from back then were very simple-minded. Even though they try to act like they were so deep back then, they were not deep. Those guys were simple-minded, just like most of these guys today.
Right. And he almost did, because he was convicted in the U.S. District Court. The case went up to appeal to the Court of Appeals. They affirmed the conviction, and then he goes. They fight they filed what we call a writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court, and 4 justices have to agree to take the case. And only one justice, Justice Brennan, wanted to take the case. But what happened in that period was the judges had clerks, young clerks, and the clerks worked on the justices one by one. So finally, not only did they take the case, but they unanimously reversed. Wow. It's a great story. HBO did a documentary on that Supreme Court situation.
Yeah, HBO they did a nice little documentary movie on that issue. But the best part of that movie, if you watch it with clips with Ali speaking. All right, so that's basically it. I just wanted to bring this to people's attention, because right now it's very popular to use that meeting that took place at Jim Brown's office to push this narrative about the black athletes back then and how awoke they were and how aware they were. You know, just for a lot of these internet revolutionaries who want to call everybody a coon and a this and a that. Let me tell you something, man. It's a lot deeper than what you think it is. Okay? Most of these movements were controlled. They're still controlled today. Okay? It's a lot deeper than what you think it is. All them guys back then, and when you check them all out, Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, they all ended up with white women anyway. All right? Jim Brown, the issue that he got into with one of his women, where he ended up throwing her out the window or something like that, or she ended up out the window, they got into a domestic violence dispute because he was with a white woman. He was with Gloria Steinem. All right? So a lot of you guys that want to run around throwing all this stuff around, you got to make sure that you do your due diligence and that you research the issues. All right? Peace.